Welcome everyone to yet another video on the channel. Such a huge thing it is, such a huge thing. Everyone wants to know, how can I make my story stand out from the crowd? It's a $1 million question. And if you're here to find a magical one-size-fits-all answer, then I'm afraid that you have come to the wrong video. Anyone who tells you that there is a magical one-size-fits-all answer for this is either lying and trying to get something over on you, or completely ignorant. A tall claim, you say? Yes, I do. Let's face it, there is nothing new under the sun. Anything that you can think of has already been done or is being done by someone else. Wait, what, really? Well, yes and no. Look, I'm not going to give you some magical answer that's going to make your story explode by a couple pieces of advice, but I can give you the tips you shall need for success. So as I just said a moment ago, there's nothing new under the sun. There is nothing that you want to do that hasn't already been done in some way, shape, or form. Especially in the realm of storytelling. There are so many stories out there, and I'm including folklore as well, mind you. But there are so many stories out there right now. There is no way that you will come up with a completely 100% original idea. So stop trying. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Stop trying to come up with a totally original and new idea that has not been done before. Now, it is very important that I make a bit of a distinction. I am not saying just throw creativity to the wind and try to steal from any story you see that you like. That's called plagiarism. What I mean by that is stop trying to make your story itself a completely original new tale. Because I hate to break it to you, but such a thing does not exist. What you should be focusing on instead are those things that will make your story be presented a different way. What you should be focusing on is creating a new creature. What you should be focusing on is fleshing out a realm that doesn't mimic or copy someone else's. What you should be focusing on are new and interesting characters presented in a different way. These are the things that make your story feel completely new and original. These are the things that give the reader of your story that, wow, that's unlike anything I've ever read. I mean, sometimes it literally only takes one small but noticeable difference to bring about a complete uniqueness to your entire story. Sometimes all it takes is having a character that is not usually in stories like the one you're doing. Sometimes all it takes is having a brand new creature that you created that people can pronounce, that's also important, in the story as well. Sometimes it's replacing the all too familiar type of character with a character who hasn't been used before, or who hasn't been used in that way before. Or maybe it's using all of these things in combination with one another. So, taking great care to avoid spoilers, my novel, Strife of the Mighty, actually hits at several of these points. Traditional type main characters are replaced with somewhat non-traditional ones. I say somewhat. For example, Alon Bracken of Verilel is a husband. Through the course of the story, he finds himself caught up in great events that he never thought he would see in his lifetime, and he plays an active participating role in these events. Instead of having him be, for instance, maybe a farm boy who loses his father or something, I am not naming any names, but instead of taking the somewhat more traditional route of that, he's a husband. And not a new husband either. He's been a husband for a little while. And so we come to his story as an established husband who takes part in these great and terrible events that shortly befall him and his wife. That was one of the unique ways I wanted to twist my story a little bit, to give it a different thought in people's minds, to separate it from the crowd in that way. Many of the creatures that you will meet in the Chronicles of Randolin are unique to the world, to that world. Yes, there are a few creatures that fantasy lovers will recognize. No dragons or elves, though. That I can promise. And believe it or not, that's a huge thing that will separate your story from so many others. Having your own creatures, or at least presenting creatures that already exist in a different way. Things like that make your reader take note, because readers are used to seeing things that have been done so many times. Whether they like them or not, when something is presented to them in a different way, their antennas immediately go up, and they're intrigued to learn more. Even if It's only ultimately to say, man, I really didn't like how that was presented. But they'll remember it, and that. Yet we've got to be careful with this. With great power comes great responsibility. Yes. Creating your own original creatures is awesome, of course. But I warn you, don't make those names too unpronounceable. Unpronounceable names annoy people to no end. On the one hand, I can understand why. On the other hand, for me anyway, if I'm reading a fantasy novel and I come across some whacked out name, to me, I'm somewhat more lenient where this is concerned. I always have been, even before I was strictly an author. I mean, personally, I find new names intriguing, interesting, and I like to kind of trouble to pronounce them. For so many other people, this is a huge no-no. A lot of people, it turns out, don't like unpronounceable names. Some do. Some really like to trouble over the pronunciation and meet at coffee shops to argue over it. But for the vast majority of people, the reverse is true. So, when you are creating these awesome creatures, and by all means, do create them, beware how many syllables you're jamming together, because the vast majority of your readers aren't going to take too long to trouble over a name that only appears twice throughout the whole story. They're just not. If you employ this tactic correctly, the results can be quite rewarding and surprising. And speaking of rewarding, let me let you in on something I have never really understood myself. Why some fantasy authors, indie or otherwise, create vast worlds full of rich description and places, and for some reason or another, deny the need for a map. Seriously, you will read through their story, and they will take you from one end of their 4,000 square mile empire that they've created, lush with rich names, each of which has a culture of its own, and yet give you no map for reference. That annoys me. And not just me. Turns out it annoys a lot of readers too. You see, having a map gives us a visual point of reference. It enables those of us who want to follow your characters with our fingertips or something through the events and adventures of their stories. It gives us a point of reference that we can visually see. It's one thing to read the name of a place on a page, but it is a totally extra dimension, an extra layer of reality, if you will, when we can read the name on the page and then, let me go to the front of the book. Oh, I see. Here it is on the map. As readers, it grounds us in your world. Or maybe a better way to say it would be, it grounds your world in our minds. Because we can see it. You've described it, but we can see it now. Now we can actually look on the map like we can look at the map of America or Cuba or Russia and say, oh, there's that place that they went. Oh, this is that kingdom he's talking about that was at war. In my view, the importance of a map, in fantasy stories especially, the groundedness that it gives a story, especially a good story, can't be understated. So yeah, guys, don't over-fret about making your story in its entirety completely new and original. Everything has already been done before. Give it those special gems, those special pieces of stars that make it original. And remember, don't make that noticeable change too difficult to pronounce. And once you've done all of this, slap a map on it. And that's pretty much it for this video. Share if you so desire. Until the next video,